Last week, we called attention to the massive disruption to the Final Fantasy XIV top-end raid community over the use of add-ons in its raid environment, with their top D, Yoshi P, saying, look, if we have to design bosses around add-on usage, then why the hell should we bother? Which prompted a lot of outcry from our World of Warcraft viewers, as well as a lot of people who follow the Race to World First, and this has been going on for a while. Why doesn't Blizzard ban add-ons outright? Especially when you look at the screens of a lot of players who are going into raiding or even going into PvP and seeing them filled with various add-ons, changing the way the game is played. That's what we're going to look at today. In association with a lot of people who make these add-ons, we're going to go over a brief history of add-ons in World of Warcraft and why they can't just get rid of them all. Let's go. I want you to cast your minds back, if you can, if you were even alive at that time, to 2004. World of Warcraft has just come out. It is taking the online community by storm. It is sucking up millions of players year on year, and it's bringing them into a brand new way of looking at online RPGs. Add-ons were always supported by Blizzard, and why the hell not? We had no idea all those years back what add-ons could become. In fact, add-ons have been around for a long time, and they've always been kind of innocent for the most part. Not cheats, but changing things, adopting things, and doing things the community likes, while also taking pressure off the developers to create all those features for them. So Blizzard created World of Warcraft with add-on developers in mind, and for a long time, like 8 years, it was all pretty innocent, to be honest. If you think back to before add-ons became a thing, or if you weren't there, let me explain. They were always in use, but just not in the way you thought. People recognized very early on that boss design, certainly in the early days of Molten Core, were based on patterns and timers, as most bosses in video games are. In fact, they kind of need to be. It's worth remembering that a computer can detect every input everybody is making all the time, and can beat you 100% of the time if it chooses to. You think about a fighting game where you fought an enemy that was clearly unfair. Yes, the game is simply checking what you're pressing and countering it before you would humanly have a chance to do it. In fact, in all video games, bosses pretty much have to play badly in order to be beaten, intentionally and by design. So players in World of Warcraft started to notice, yeah, okay, this guy does this at a certain time. What we can do is start a stopwatch outside of the game and track that so that we can have this audible boss mod system going on in the early days of TeamSpeak and Ventrilo, where we were calling them out with physical stopwatches in hand as to when mechanics were going to happen, and that's how the early guilds did it. Blizzard, of course, recognized this and started adding things called APIs. APIs are simply ways the game outputs information that is usable by other developers in order to turn it into something more legible, something easier. Changing your combat log was a great one back in vanilla to show you what type of damage you were getting in a nice simplistic way, how you died, things like that. And of course, we started the beginnings of bigwigs and deadly boss mods, where the stopwatches were taken from the physical world and put into the game. But the Blizzard already started to draw the line, certainly in 2005. These add-ons were utilizing the tools that Blizzard gave them, and over the years, more and more information was given out to the players to use, as well as for Blizzard's own usage, such as the Armory or the Battle.net app. That information is going somewhere and can be used by the players. In 2005, an add-on called Decursive started to show its ugly head. Now, some of you may still use Decursive, but it does not work the way it used to work, certainly back in my day, my boomer days of playing World of Warcraft. Decursive, in the way it used to work, would automatically detect everybody in the raid and figure out if they had a debuff that could be dispelled by you. Not only that, you could make a macro called /decursive, and you could spam this one button. And what this one button would do would automatically seek out the players that had a debuff that you could dispel, and dispel them without you having to target them, look at your raid frames, do anything whatsoever. Think about that now. You could literally spam any button on your keyboard that you would assign to this macro, and it would just dispel everybody automatically. You didn't have to do a goddamn thing. You didn't even have to know what the name of your decursing or magic removal spell was. It would do it automatically for you. This is where Blizzard drew the first line. Hey, we're totally fine with you guys making add-ons. That's fine. We're okay with that. But we do not want add-ons to play the game for you. Tracking a boss timer, sure, you're doing it anyway with a stopwatch, not a big deal. But once you've figured out how to let something play the game for you, That's no good to us. We don't want to do that. And they broke the Decursive add-on. Funny story, I actually got promoted in the first time I stepped up to a high-end guild during their Blackwing Lair trial run for me. I had the most dispels on the Chromagus fight. I pressed one button the entire encounter, and I got promoted off the back of that, because they did not know the power of Decursive. And I was a little annoyed when that add-on got broken, because it got me promoted into a guild. I passed my trial phase very, very quickly, thanks to Decursive, so thank you, early add-on developers. And from that point on, up until Wrath of the Lich King, people were making pretty innocuous, yet slightly better add-ons. We had really in-depth websites that were working on things before Discord even existed, such as Elitist Jerks, which Ian Hazakostas was a part of at the time, who were looking for more and more advanced ways of figuring things out. And during Wrath of the Lich King, there was a big launch of an add-on that took the raiding world, at least, by storm, and that was called PowerAuras. PowerAuras is very, very easy to see in a lot of raid kill videos. If you go back to Wrath of the Lich King and Insidia, you'll see nearly every player using PowerAuras. It's spread through the community by wildfire. Now, what did it actually do? Well, it's not Weakauras. It was the early sort of middling stepchild. It was the baby that was left up in the attic version of Weakauras. Essentially, all it did was allow you to track things like buffs and debuffs, such as what bosses would put on you, and give you a different graphical option to deal with it. That was it. You could make a giant graphic that indicated you had the debuff of death that you had to run out of the raid with. Very simple stuff, and Blizzard was okay with this because you were just utilizing the information the game was giving you anyway, just changing it graphically. Not much different than the people making fancy UIs, using crazy things like Ice Hood and all those kinds of things of fond memory of yesteryear. So Blizzard was fine with this, and every raider made their raiders pretty much install this, because one of the most common things, and I remember this clearly at XT Deconstructor, was a fight that had individuals have to run out of the raid, very similar to Baron-Geddon, put "you are the bomb," and instead of waiting for that debuff to pop up, would actually physically run out of the raid. And Blizzard was okay with this. It's not playing the game for you, it's just displaying the same information in a slightly different way. But towards the end of Wrath of the Lich King, things got a little bit egregious because some very, very clever mathematicians figured out that they could utilize the current APIs that Blizzard had implemented to actually project images onto the game world. Now, you will be aware that add-ons, of course, simply put images on your UI. They don't do anything to the game world itself, it just displays your information in a different way. AVR actually physically put textures and things into the game, onto the floor, onto the walls, and it was so clever that it could track things that you were supposed to keep your eyes open and avoid, such as Festergut's bombs flying around everywhere, or Syndragos's ice tombs, and it would tell you where you could and could not stand to simply nullify this mechanic. Now, Blizzard obviously recognized at the time that the ability of players to literally project images onto the game world was a very bad thing, and that could lead into some really dangerous territory that was already becoming readily apparent after PowerAuras and things had started to rear their ugly heads. So Blizzard stepped in and made sure that that was no longer possible. Again, this is an add-on that kind of crosses that line between you taking the same information the game is giving you and turning it into something that is physically changing the world, making the game too easy and very difficult for the devs to work with. So that's a lot of fairness right there. But then we get fancier. As we move through the expansions, Weakauras does start to appear. And the Weakauras team did help with this video, and they're fantastic. And I want to say a big thanks to them for being very open with us with how these things work. And more importantly, how things can change going forward. And we'll get there shortly. And now Blizzard has a problem. Weakauras isn't actually doing anything egregious. It's using the information that's readily available in the game, and it's just displaying it in a different way. But the devs start to run into problems as these things are getting a lot more powerful than they previously considered, meaning they have to up their game. If we go back to Final Fantasy XIV for a second, which has a strict no add-on policy, it's very quickly and easy to see if you follow any of the boss fights, including the current Omega Ultimate that is being tackled by a lot of players, how Weakauras would destroy those encounters. And in fact, we have a prime example. If we look at this Omega fight, and I know for our World of Warcraft viewers this will look a little confusing, but all I want you to do is look at the debuffs that are present on the players in phase 1 of this fight. And what you'll see is just a series of numbers. Now, what's about to happen in the next couple of minutes is extraordinarily difficult. This is an ultimate encounter after all, and they are the most difficult encounters in MMOs at the moment. And that is all going to be dealt with by the players based on numbers. Once these numbers are thrown out, It is then entirely down to the players to figure out what to do with that information, including reorientating themselves, splitting themselves into 2 different groups, which will randomly change depending on the number you're assigned on a pull-by-pull basis, and then deal with the very difficult mechanics that are going on, and they have to do this very, very quickly. And all of that is decided by numbers. Now, we have a great comparison to how Weakauras and very powerful add-ons change the nature of encounters depending on who has access to them, and really backs up what Yoshi P was talking about. Let's go back to Archimonde Mythic. We had an epic showdown going on, Paragon versus Method. Everybody was tracking who was going to get a legendary ring. Paragon managed to get their legendary ring during the reset. Both guilds are working on the last boss. Both guilds are at the absolute pinnacle of their ability. Who's going to come out first? Well, Method eventually clinched it. It's only a few days later, when other guilds kill it, that the videos are released. Remember, this predates the live stream era. And what we see is something very, very interesting happen with one of the mechanics called Wrought Chaos. Wrought Chaos is a very simple mechanic. People are marked in pairs, and they will shoot a laser between each other. If people are caught in between those lasers, they take a huge amount of damage and potentially die. And if 2 of them get caught, then you just die straight away. Very simple mechanic. Now, here's where our good friend JustWait and Co. come in. JustWait, a current member of the tech team on Echo, but a previous World First Raider himself, and also a contributor towards this video. They managed to figure out an add-on. Method managed to figure out, using the radar system, how they could simply nullify this entire difficult mechanic by simply having the radar detect who was paired, draw a line between them, and then also tell those players if somebody was in between them. That line would change to red. If your line is red, you need to shuffle your feet a little bit until it goes blue. And if it's blue, you're fine, you can stand still. This enabled Method to nullify this entire mechanic while just pumping out DPS into the boss and barely having to move. Vice versa though. Vice versa, Paragon did not have access to the same thing. In fact, they did it in what would be considered a Final Fantasy XIV style. Instead, they had an add-on that just assigned numbers. That was it. Through 1 through 20. That's it. All it did was do that. And then they had to come up with a dance, which is how a lot of these things are solved in FF14. They had to position themselves accordingly to make sure that these lines would accurately shoot. And it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, and it's likely how the devs intended this mechanic to play out when it was designed. It's such wonderful decision making, coming up with a solution to a problem that isn't just an add-on solving the problem for you. It's great to see. It's really wonderful, and it shows the difference powerful add-ons can make to certain mechanics. One team can basically ignore it, the other team has to come up with a really majestic and poetic way of solving this mechanic. Ultimately, of course, Paragon did not get that world first. They came second on that one, but it was great to see how add-on usage goes in. Again, Blizzard stepped in. They weren't happy, and now you'll know that the radar functionality, for example, is no longer present in raids. What about Star Auger? Star Auger, the add-on developers there, the big brains, managed to come up with a way of nullifying the Grand Conjunction mechanic. Very similar to what happened on Archimonde Mythic. This, instead of having to players visually look around the room and figure out who they could pair with, find that person, gave you a big, bold, beautiful icon and a place to go so you could go and sort it out yourself. Blizzard was not happy with this. This is the most difficult part of this fight, and you guys are making a mockery of it. So they managed to fix it by making it so that you couldn't attach things to friendly nameplates. And that made it so that that add-on in particular didn't work. Blizzard has some power that they've demonstrated, and you've probably not even noticed it. Let me take you to another add-on. Have any of you ever used a leveling guide in World of Warcraft? And you've probably noticed that an arrow appears on your screen, if you've got it installed, and it points you in real time in the direction you need to go. If you turn your head, the arrow will move. If you run in the wrong direction, it will tell you to turn around. It tracks physically where you are in the world. Have you ever seen it in a raid? Some of you old heads will say, yes. Yes, I have. In fact, one of the best examples of this would have been Thaddeus all the way back in vanilla. The arrow system is obviously working. It can be used today for these leveling add-ons. But it also existed in raids. And it was utilized on several encounters, telling people exactly where to move and to go to. Another example would be the rock boss inside Hellfire Citadel that had the players stand in specific positions so they could be grabbed by the hands coming out of the ground, and it would automatically assign people to the best possible location based on where they were stood, making sure nobody was going to the wrong spot. And then they broke it. But how? Well, Blizzard determined that they could break this one, and it was definitely going to be a problem going forward by making it so that add-on did not work specifically in raids, but would work in the open world. Blizzard does have that power. Okay, so they have the power then, Mike. What you're saying is they can break these things in the raid environment. That can totally happen. So why aren't they doing it with the other things, if especially it's causing them stress by having to build much more difficult fights, and as people like Yoshi P are saying, makes things worthless in some people's eyes in terms of boss raid development. And in fact, the limitation isn't on probably where they want to draw a line. In fact, I know that after having this discussion with Blizzard when I was there on their campus. Some things they can't fix. What about Queen Azshara? Now, if you don't know about Queen Azshara, and I'm not talking about tracking the debuffs that people got in there, I'm talking about Queen's Decree. Very similar to Star Auger. What is Queen's Decree for those people who've not taken part in the Queen Azshara encounter? Queen's Decree is an intermission phase. The boss is untargetable, you've finished with her adds, and you have this dance, FF14 style, that must take place before the fight will continue. It's basically a survive the dance phase. Queen's Decree gives you 2 random debuffs, and they're all different every single time you go into that fight. It could be something like Soak and Orb, which are located around the room, and run in a circle. It can be stand still and Soak and Orb. It could be stand with other people and Soak and Orb. It could be stand with other people and don't Soak and Orb. It can be run around and don't touch any orbs. It could be any variety of touch an orb, stand on your own, keep moving, etc. These 3 variables that get alternated between. Now then, very quickly, people came up with an add-on which simply told you in big, giant letters exactly what you needed to do, and you never had to learn the debuffs whatsoever. And it needed a little bit of setup. This required, in fact, 2 Weakauras to achieve. You would have everybody use 1 Weakaura, and then the commander use another one that would assign the instructions out. And also, you had to place world markers out in the world in a very specific spot, so it married up to the information the Weakaura was going to tell you. And essentially, this nullifies that mechanic like we've seen in the past. You don't have to learn anything. In fact, you just AFK, and the game tells you exactly what to do, and you just do it, and that mechanic is over. That's the same as Star Auger, right, Mike? That's the same as the other things you've talked about so far. Yes. But what can Blizzard do about that? In fact, why was that not disabled while things like Star Auger were disabled? Why things like Wrought Chaos were disabled? Why was that? Well, it comes down to what can Blizzard actually do? And where does this information come from? If we look at some of the more egregious Weakauras we've seen recently, such as Anduin, for example, Echo's Anduin one, or the Jailer one, simply assigning you specific holes to jump in so that nobody duplicates or overlaps, very similar to what we've seen in Queen Azshara, for example, with Queen's Decree. Can't they just disable that? No. The interesting thing about these add-ons is they actually just pull a lot of this information from the combat log. The combat log is all that is necessary in order to generate what visually appears to us as very, very powerful tools. It's not really possible to raid without the combat log. Without the combat log, you can't figure out what you were hit by, how much damage it does, how is it being divided, what type of damage it is, what went wrong. We can't log anymore. You can't use things like details. You can't use damage meters. God bless telling people they can't use damage meters anymore in World of Warcraft. While it is a thing in Final Fantasy XIV, at least for some, it is not a thing in World of Warcraft and never has been. It's a staple of the game. And there are many, many more add-ons that simply track what's going on in the combat log, including your nice fancy UI, which tracks your debuffs and things, is all being pulled from the combat log. All that information, all those add-ons that simply change how your game looks, simple, innocent information is all pulled from the combat log, which means, as long as the combat log exists, so do these add-ons. Now, Blizzard has some things they can do, as I've just pointed out in this video. And I'd love to see your suggestions on it. In fact, many of you will probably instantly say, I can raid without a damage meter. That's no problem. I raid with default UI. It's no problem to me. I'm sure it is, for many of you, not a big issue. But for many, many more, it certainly would be an issue, including myself. I do think Weakauras have got a little out of hand, but at the same time, I don't want to raid without a damage meter, and I don't want to raid without a nicer UI. I don't really want to do that. And a lot of these things use basic information, which means changing one thing snowballs and butterflies and breaks things that are completely innocent and unnecessary to be changed, and are in fact usually a pretty damn good quality of life change for many, many players. When talking to Blizzard about this, they simply said it's a problem for them to solve. And Blizzard has proved this. They've created several bosses in recent memory where add-ons just weren't a big deal. Halondrus is probably the best example. Despite outside raid leaders, tech teams that both Liquid and Echo were using, and having all these people be at calls, and Weakauras designers, and add-on designers, and all these kinds of things, they couldn't really help with that fight. The mechanics of it were actually very simple, just very difficult to execute. Now, the counter to that is, of course, it became one of the, if not the most nerfed boss in history due to how difficult it was, so there's some balancing and fine-tuning there, but it did prove quite easily that you can make bosses that don't rely on add-ons to achieve. And in fact, it's very arguable that these Weakauras, such as the Jailer dropping in the holes, aren't a big deal in the first place, and the players could easily do it. And we could look at the same as the Anduin one, with Scripe famously saying it took us 3 months to design this Anduin Weakaura, and Liquid didn't, and it wasn't a problem because they just YOLO'd it and it was fine. A lot of times, these add-ons that look fantastical and crazy and all those kinds of things are all manageable without in a decent way. But it definitely does cause some issues when they get out of hand, and that's where Blizzard likes to draw the line with their boss design to go for. But just bear in mind, just turning add-ons off might seem simple enough, but honestly, it has a snowball effect that you need to consider. I personally would kind of like to try it out. I like it. It's fun. Everything I do in Final Fantasy XIV involves no add-ons, and I do everything blind, and I have the greatest of times. I don't feel that way when I go to World of Warcraft. I'd be interested to see what you guys think. I want to give a massive shout out and thank you to Weakauras for helping us with a lot of information in this video, and of course JustWait for filling in a lot of blanks with his long history of add-on design. Absolutely amazing. Thank you, everybody. Be sure to check out our website for a lot more Blizzard interviews, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.